Did you know that even if your mother has been physically absent for a long time, whether she never spoke a word to you or has long passed away, her presence still lives deeply within you? Not just in your memories, but in every breath you take, every emotion you feel, and every decision you make each day. There are wounds that cannot heal until you dare to face the mother within your soul. This question will follow you throughout your journey. Have you ever dared to confront the shadow of the mother within you? Have you ever paused to consider that the idea of mother goes far beyond the woman who gave you life? It's something much deeper, more mysterious, and surprisingly universal. According to Carl Jung, the mother isn't just a person, she's a timeless symbol that lives in the collective unconscious of all humanity. Imagine this. The mother archetype is like an ancient blueprint embedded in the soul of every human being. It's not about one individual's personality or behavior, but a universal psychic pattern passed down through generations. This archetype holds two powerful faces. On one hand, she is the source of life, nourishment, and protection. On the other, she embodies danger, control, and even destruction. Think about the stories and myths you've heard, from Demeter and Persephone in Greek mythology, who represent the cycles of life and death, to the Virgin Mary in Christian tradition, symbolizing compassion and nurturing, or even the earth itself, often called Mother Earth, giving life but also showing raw, untamed power. The mother archetype is everywhere, showing us that she is far bigger than any one woman. Now here's the twist. This dual nature, this paradox of the mother, is something Jung called the Great Mother. She is simultaneously the giver of life and the devourer, the protector and the smotherer. And it's this paradox that can create deep confusion and pain within us when our personal experience of mothering doesn't match this profound, symbolic image. What most people don't realize is that when we confuse our own mother, with all her imperfections, mistakes, and struggles, with this archetypal mother, we get caught in a psychic maze. We replay childhood wounds in adult relationships, yearning desperately for care but simultaneously fearing it. We seek approval, yet dread rejection. We want closeness, but are terrified of losing ourselves. Let me share a story. A friend of mine grew up with a mother who was loving but overbearing. Every time she tried to assert herself, her mother's reaction made her feel guilty and small. As an adult, she found herself stuck in relationships where her partner mirrored that same pattern, loving yet controlling, caring but suffocating. She couldn't understand why she kept attracting this until she learned about the archetype of the Great Mother and realized she was trapped in a cycle repeating an ancient pattern. This archetype is not just personal, it is collective, transcending time and culture. It's encoded in our dreams, our fears, our hopes, and even in how we relate to others. When this archetype is split, when we hold onto only one side and deny the other, it creates a psychological fracture. Idealizing the mother means denying her shadow, demonizing her means rejecting her light. Either way, we fall into painful projection, casting our inner wounds onto partners, mentors, bosses, or even spiritual guides. So, understanding this archetype helps us step back and see our personal stories in a larger context. It frees us from blaming one person and opens the door to healing something much bigger, the pattern itself. Scientific research in developmental psychology supports this idea that early maternal relationships shape the brain's wiring and emotional development. For example, studies show how maternal stress or trauma can affect a child's stress responses, emotional regulation, and even susceptibility to anxiety later in life, evidence that some of these archetypal patterns are intertwined with biology, not just myth. By recognizing the mother archetype's vast, paradoxical nature, we start to realize that healing the wounds connected to it is not just about our personal history but about reconnecting with something primal and universal. This is the first crucial step in reclaiming our wholeness. When we speak of the mother archetype, we often imagine warmth, care, and unconditional love. But what happens when this maternal figure takes on a darker role? Carl Jung introduced us to the concept of the shadow mother, a hidden, often frightening aspect of the mother archetype that consumes rather than nourishes. Unlike the loving, nurturing mother we long for, the shadow mother represents control, suffocation, and emotional imprisonment. She's the force that clings too tightly, that smothers individuality under the guise of care. Think of her as the invisible chains wrapped in a velvet glove, protection twisted into possession. Imagine living your whole life carrying the weight of this shadow without even realizing it. You might move to a new city, change your job, or start new relationships, but still feel trapped, like an unseen force is pulling the strings behind the scenes, whispering, "You can't be free. You belong to me." This is the shadow mother's prison. A real-life example comes to mind. A woman I once worked with described how every time she tried to express her true feelings or take a step toward independence, she was overwhelmed by crippling guilt and self-doubt. She felt torn between her desire to live authentically and the haunting inner voice telling her she was selfish for wanting more. Years of trying to please a mother who was emotionally unavailable had left her psyche tethered to that shadow, and she couldn't break free. Jung taught that this shadow side is not an anomaly or a personal flaw. It's an inseparable part of the mother archetype itself. The great mother is both creator and destroyer, giver and taker. When the shadow mother isn't acknowledged consciously, she becomes a silent jailer of the soul. You might see her reflected in myths, goddesses who devour their children, dragons guarding treasures, or dark maternal figures who refuse to let go. Psychologically, the shadow mother manifests when love becomes controlling, when protection turns into possession, and care masks dependency. The tragedy is that this prison is often invisible because it wears the language of love. Phrases like, "I only want what's best for you," or "I'm protecting you," disguise the betrayal beneath. The child inside learns to absorb this energy silently, shrinking freedom into abandonment and autonomy into betrayal. This shadow is a master of disguise. It creeps into adulthood as chronic self-doubt, an inner critic echoing a mother's voice from the past. It surfaces as fear of independence, a reflexive worry about disappointing others, or an unconscious pull toward relationships that replicate the suffocating dynamics of childhood. Setting boundaries feels like betrayal. Speaking your truth feels selfish. Walking away feels impossible. Imagine trying to assert yourself at work or in love, only to feel an overwhelming wave of guilt and fear. That's the shadow mother's grip, subtle but unyielding. She says things like, "You're ungrateful, you're bad, you're selfish." And even though you may physically be an adult, emotionally, you remain tethered, a child orbiting the gravitational pull of this shadow. Jung once said the psyche prefers the known hell to the unknown heaven. This shadow mother is that hell, familiar, predictable, falsely comforting. People stay stuck not because they want pain, but because pain preserves a psychic bond. It becomes loyalty. Self-betrayal masquerades as love. What's the shadow mother's most potent weapon? Guilt. Not the healthy guilt that guides moral choices, but an ancient, primal fear that separating from this force means death, exile from the container of life itself. Under this crushing weight, many freeze. They sabotage joy, suppress their truth, and collapse before claiming their power. But Jung reminds us, the shadow mother is also the gatekeeper of the soul's treasure. She guards the gold buried in fear, demanding a confrontation. The hero's journey begins when you dare to face the shadow, not to destroy it, but to reclaim what it holds hostage, your right to exist, to feel, to create, to choose. This is no easy path. It demands that you bring your deepest rage, sorrow, and betrayal into the light. You must let the abandoned child inside you speak, and you must listen. This process, Jung called active imagination, a conscious dialogue with the shadow mother within. You visualize her, speak with her, express all that has been silenced. And in this sacred confrontation, something powerful happens. The shadow loosens its grip, the inner child begins to rise, and your psyche remembers that it belongs to itself. Yes, this phase is often accompanied by deep emotional collapse, depression, emptiness, grief. But this crumbling is sacred. It dismantles inherited illusions and clears space for authentic light, not borrowed from others, but ignited from within. Remember, the shadow mother is not your enemy. She's your threshold, your teacher, fierce and demanding, asking you to awaken to your freedom. When you dare to face her, not with blame but with courage and compassion, You step out of being a child who pleases and into an adult who chooses. This is ancestral liberation, breaking the chains of psychic inheritance and returning to the soul's true home. When we talk about healing from the wounds left by our mothers, it's easy to focus only on the physical presence of the woman who raised us. But Carl Jung invites us to look much deeper, into a hidden, powerful force that lives within us all, the internal mother. This is not your mother as a person, but a psychic imprint, a silent ruler who governs the inner world of your thoughts, feelings, and choices. Imagine a monarch who never speaks loudly or commands with force, yet shapes every decision you make. She doesn't shout, she doesn't strike, but she influences your life with quiet, unyielding power. This is the internal mother, sometimes called the mother imago, a deep psychological echo of the maternal presence formed in your earliest days. From the moment you took your first breath, you were seen through the eyes of your mother or the person who stood in her place. Their tone, gaze, and embrace became the mirror reflecting your first sense of self. If you were welcomed, held, and loved consistently, this internal mother became a source of security and confidence. But if you were neglected, criticized, or emotionally withdrawn, she could become a silent saboteur, a subtle voice of doubt and limitation. Picture this: you're about to speak up in a meeting, share a bold idea, or express your true feelings, but a quiet whisper inside says, "Don't be too much," or "You're not good enough." This inner voice isn't random. It's the shadow of the internal mother, a ghost born from early experiences that still clings tightly. The tragedy is that the internal mother's voice is often mistaken for your own. You might think these doubts, fears, or hesitations are personal flaws or genuine concerns, when in fact, they are inherited scripts, programming laid down long ago before you could speak for yourself. This voice can manifest as constant self-criticism, feelings of unworthiness, or the pressure to please others at the expense of your own needs. Many people live under this silent dictatorship without realizing it, unknowingly sacrificing their creativity, desires, and even relationships to appease this inner ruler. A powerful example: I knew someone who excelled professionally but struggled with chronic indecision. Every choice felt heavy, and even small acts of self-assertion triggered waves of anxiety. She later discovered that her internal mother, that quiet, relentless voice of disapproval, was the root of this paralysis. It wasn't just fear of failure, but a deep internalized message that she must not rock the boat or stand out. Jung described this phenomenon as a form of psychic colonization, where the soul is no longer sovereign but ruled by a frozen image from the past. Even more paradoxical, many remain loyal to this inner mother, hoping that if they just conform enough, they will finally earn her love and acceptance. But here's the harsh truth: the internal mother is not real in the sense of being a living, evolving person. She is a fixed imprint, a shadow programmed into your psyche. No matter how much you bend or contort yourself to gain her approval, you will only sink deeper into self-abandonment. Healing requires a radical act of separation, not from your physical mother, but from this inner image that holds your soul hostage. Naming this complex, facing it directly through inner dialogue, visualization, and symbolic rituals becomes essential. In Jungian psychology, this process is called active imagination. It invites you to consciously meet the internal mother, not to fight her, but to understand her fears, her pain, and her intentions. Often, this inner figure reveals her own wounds: jealousy, sorrow, loneliness, and confusion passed down through generations. Through this courageous dialogue, the ego can reclaim its voice. You begin to disentangle your true self from the inherited scripts. You reclaim boundaries you once feared to set and rediscover the power that you surrendered for survival. Climax: this confrontation is a turning point, a psychic death and rebirth. You move from being the obedient child silenced by this inner dictator to becoming the sovereign adult who governs from self-awareness and compassion. But the work doesn't stop at disarming the internal mother's shadow. Jung emphasized the need to also reclaim the positive face of the mother archetype within, the inner nurturer, protector, and creative force. This positive internal mother becomes your source of self-care, intuition, and inner wisdom. You learn to mother yourself gently, nurturing the parts once neglected or rejected. This is not fantasy or denial but a real inner restructuring grounded in kindness, ritual, and connection to deeper feminine symbols, the soft strength that balances authority with warmth. As you build this new relationship, your inner voice shifts from criticism to encouragement. Your creativity begins to flow again, no longer stifled by fear or self-doubt. You start to trust your instincts, honor your emotions, and embrace your full potential. This transformation is sacred. It frees you from psychic imprisonment and births a new identity rooted in self-sovereignty. You no longer seek external approval or validation because you have found the home within. One of the most profound and painful thresholds in our psychological journey is the symbolic separation from the mother complex. Carl Jung described this as a sacred rite, a passage from being fused with the inner mother to becoming a distinct, sovereign self. This is not about rejecting your mother as a person, but confronting the gravitational pull of the archetypal mother who holds the ego captive in unconscious loyalty. Imagine the ego as a young bird still tethered to the nest. The urge to fly, to explore, to claim its own space is fierce. Yet something invisible tethers it back, a force pulling it towards safety and familiarity. This force is the mother complex, the voice, the guilt, the fear that to leave is to die, to abandon, to betray. Think of those moments in your life when you hesitated to break free, maybe from an unhealthy relationship, a stifling job, or a limiting belief, because deep inside, the fear whispered, if you leave, you're lost. If you grow, you're guilty. This is the mother complex in action, binding the ego to patterns that no longer serve you. Jung called this separation a second birth. The first birth freed the body into the world. The second frees the soul into itself. It's a process wrapped in grief and terror, because to separate is to face the primal fear of annihilation. To break the psychic bond with the mother image is to risk the void, the terrifying silence where once the mother's voice held sway. The guilt here is not ordinary guilt. It's archaic, almost sacred in its depth. It whispers that thriving is betrayal, that independence equals abandonment. This feeling is woven into the fabric of our psyche through ancestral and cultural scripts, often unconsciously passed down through generations. I recall a client who spent years trapped in a cycle of pleasing her family and suppressing her own dreams. Every time she considered stepping into her power, leaving a controlling environment or pursuing her passion, she was overwhelmed by a crushing guilt. "I can't hurt them," she said. Yet this guilt was not hers alone. It was a psychic inheritance from an unlived life, a shadow she was carrying unknowingly. This is why so many people avoid this sacred separation. The comfort of suffocation often feels safer than the risk of freedom. Even toxic dynamics can feel familiar and thus secure, in a painful paradox. Jung was clear. These are not neuroses but archetypal currents of the collective unconscious, universal forces we all must face if we are to become whole. Imagine the weight of carrying an invisible leash, an ancient bond that pulls you back whenever you try to assert your individuality. This psychic leash is forged from primal fears and ancestral loyalties. It tightens around your heart every time you say no, every time you set a boundary, every time you claim your voice. Avoiding this separation results in what Jung called psychic captivity. The adult may live a polished life on the surface but harbors an unseen, unhealed child beneath, a child desperate for permission to be real. This internal orphan hesitates, defers, and suppresses, living not from true authority but from fear of upsetting the mother figure within. But here is the sacred truth. The path of separation, though daunting, is the hero's journey. It is the descent into the dark forest of the unconscious, the confrontation with the dragon that guards your freedom, the shadow of the mother archetype. This journey is littered with grief, confusion, rage, and ancestral silence. It demands mourning for the childhood never lived and the illusions shattered. To refuse this call is to live a life scripted by avoidance, endlessly replaying the unresolved dramas of the mother complex in relationships, career, and self-worth. The ego must die for the self to be born. Jung described this as a psychological crucifixion, the death of the compliant child who believed love must be earned through silence and sacrifice. In its place rises the sovereign adult, imperfect but grounded, vulnerable but free, willing to face life on its own terms. Yet this birth is messy. It requires facing the terrifying emptiness that follows the loss of the mother's psychic hold, the void Jung called sacred space. This space is frightening only if left unclaimed. It becomes a fertile ground for the new self if filled with your own values, desires, and authentic voice. Many who embark on this path experience what feels like a spiritual or existential crisis, a breakdown that precedes breakthrough. They may lose direction, feel isolated, or question everything they believed. But this is the alchemical process of nigredo, the blackening necessary for transformation. From this darkness, the sovereign ego awakens. This is not the ego of arrogance or defensiveness but the stable, rooted ego of self-trust. One that no longer acts to please but to express truth, no longer fears rejection but embraces mystery, no longer seeks control but honors authenticity. Separation from the mother complex is more than psychological. It's a spiritual leap into wild, sacred territory, the landscape of the true self. It means turning away from inherited scripts and toward your own inner guide. This shift changes everything. You stop living by others' expectations or old family myths. Relationships transform from reenactments of past wounds into spaces of genuine reciprocity. Purpose becomes about contribution, not approval. And perhaps most miraculously, this journey is not only personal but ancestral. By breaking free, you interrupt the transmission of psychic chains. You become a conscious ancestor, not saving the past but redeeming it, ending the cycle for future generations. Healing from the mother wound is not a simple task. It's a profound journey, a passage through darkness into light, where you are invited to become the true author of your own story. Many of us grow up feeling trapped by expectations, by inherited pain, by roles that were never chosen but imposed. Yet, deep inside, there is a spark waiting to ignite, a voice longing to tell its own tale. Imagine for a moment the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are. How much of that narrative was shaped by the unseen forces of your mother complex? Maybe you've carried feelings of unworthiness, guilt, or the pressure to constantly please, to hide your true desires out of fear of rejection or abandonment. These stories can feel like a script written long before you had a say, a script that plays on repeat in your mind, dictating your choices, your relationships, your dreams. But here lies the powerful truth. You are not bound to this script forever. The moment you recognize this, you begin to step into your sovereignty. This is the heart of the healing journey, reclaiming your voice, reclaiming your power. It is a call to courage because it requires facing parts of yourself that have been silenced or neglected. It means standing in the discomfort of grief, anger, and longing without turning away. Consider a real-life example, a woman named Sarah, who for years felt invisible and unlovable. She constantly sought approval from others, especially romantic partners, replaying patterns from her childhood with her emotionally distant mother. Through deep inner work, therapy, journaling, and symbolic rituals, Sarah began to recognize these patterns were not her fault, nor were they her destiny. She started rewriting her internal story, setting boundaries, and learning to nurture her own needs. It wasn't easy. There were moments of profound grief and loneliness. But each time she reclaimed a piece of herself, she felt a little freer, a little more whole. This transformation is the mini-climax of your journey. It's that powerful turning point when you no longer live as a passive character caught in old dynamics but rise as the conscious creator of your life. You move from survival to sovereignty, from reaction to intention, from silence to authentic expression. Yet, the path is not linear. Healing is cyclical. There will be setbacks and breakthroughs, tears and triumphs. But every step taken with awareness is a step toward freedom. You begin to realize that the power to change your story was always within you. It was just waiting to be awakened. So here is the invitation. Dare to become the author of your own life. Write new chapters filled with compassion for yourself, with fierce honesty, and with the courage to choose what truly nourishes your soul. This is not just about healing wounds. It's about creating a life that reflects your deepest truth. Facing the shadow of the mother within you is one of the most challenging and transformative journeys you will ever undertake. It is a path woven with pain, but also rich with the promise of profound healing and rebirth. When you gather the courage to step through this inner doorway, you do more than just liberate yourself. You begin to unravel the generational chains of suffering and open the possibility for a new legacy of freedom and wholeness. This process is not about blaming or condemning anyone. It's about embracing the fullness of your story, including the parts that have been hidden, denied, or misunderstood. Healing starts when you hold the complexity of your mother's humanity, her wounds, her limitations, and her love, without losing your own sense of self. This act of compassionate witnessing transforms the wounds you carry into wisdom, allowing the light of your true self to shine through. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story matters. It may be the light someone else has been searching for in their own darkness. And if you know someone who is silently struggling with the weight of inherited pain or the illusion that love must come with sacrifice, please share this video with them. Together, we can create a community of healing and understanding. Before you go, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we dive deep into the hidden architecture of the psyche and explore the journey toward authentic selfhood, a path that leads from shadow into light, from fragmentation into wholeness. Thank you for being here, for your bravery in facing the inner work, and for choosing to reclaim your story. Until next time, may you walk your path with courage, compassion, and the freedom to be truly yourself.